Tonight, as the presidential hopefuls make their last-minute pitch for votes, when it comes to Capitol Hill, the question remains. After the election, which party will control the Senate?
Democrats have to defend every single incumbent. They cannot lose a single race.
The battle over Washington's balance of power. Plus, Israel at war, the latest from the Middle East amid a renewed push for a hostage exchange and a Gaza ceasefire. And as President Biden makes a public apology for Indigenous boarding schools.
A lot of them died. Some of them probably died from broken hearts.
CBN News takes a trip to Montana to see firsthand the horror they caused. All this and more tonight on Faith Nation. The battle over the nation's balance of power. Good evening in Washington. I'm Jenna Browder. The razor-thin presidential race is getting most of the headlines, but it's the fight for Capitol Hill that could determine how Washington works over the next 2 years. Control of the Senate is up for grabs, and several critical races are extremely close. CBN News Capitol Hill correspondent Michelle London shows us which candidates to watch in the run-up to November 5th.
With a total of 34 Senate seats up for election, there's a lot at stake. The majority party will have power over the next president's cabinet appointments and judicial nominations, as well as influencing their legislative agenda. As Democrats cling to a slim 51 Senate seat majority, 10 competitive races in these deep red states threaten to shift the balance of power.
Democrats have to defend every single incumbent. They cannot lose a single race. And they also need Harris to win the presidency so that Tim Walz would be the tiebreaker. So
given that situation, we asked Jessica Taylor of Cook Political Report which states to keep a close watch. She sees the most critical being Republican-leaning Montana, where incumbent Democratic Senator Jon Tester stands to lose his seat.
His toughest challenger and most well-financed, best well-financed challenger in Tim Sheehy there. He is a former Navy SEAL, served in Afghanistan, Purple Heart recipient. He owns an aerial firefighting company there. And we have seen in polling that he has been pulling ahead of Tester.
Sheehy's possible defeat of Tester is widely seen as one of the GOP's best chances to reclaim the Senate. Another key red state to watch, West Virginia, where longtime Democrat incumbent Joe Manchin is retiring.
I think Democrats would have had a tough time even defending that seat. Republicans have ceded that. We rate that race as actually safe Republican.
If this happens, Senate Republicans would only need one more victory to reclaim control if they're able to avoid upsets elsewhere. In the battleground of Michigan, voting has already started, and a tight contest is underway for the state's first open Senate seat in a decade. A critical test for Democrat Rep. Elissa Slotkin as she faces off against her Republican opponent, former U.S. Rep. Mike Rogers.
Rogers, he was chair of the House Intelligence Committee during the Bush years. Now he retired from Congress in 2014. He's a former FBI agent. If he struggled to raise money, Slotkin has outspent him, but Michigan is just going to be very close.
In neighboring state Ohio, the Senate race is now considered a toss-up, where Democratic Senator Sherrod Brown is running for re-election. Taylor sees Brown as vulnerable against Republican candidate and Trump ally Bernie Moreno.
We're seeing polling out now. It's within the margin of error. A Republican poll this week had it tied. It's still going to be close, and it might just be that that's too much for Sherrod Brown to overcome, too, for those number of crossover voters.
Brown currently holds a 4-point lead and 10% of Trump voters. That's according to a September New York Times Siena College poll. However, Trump is expected to carry Ohio in the presidential race. Looking ahead at high-profile battleground Pennsylvania, many election watchers are talking about this ad from Democrat incumbent Senator Bob Casey.
Casey bucked Biden to protect fracking, and he sided with Trump to end NAFTA and put tariffs on China to stop them from cheating.
Analysts say while this shows Casey's ability to be bipartisan, they also believe it's a result of Vice President Harris losing ground in the state, which could affect other races. Republican challenger Dave McCormick is moving up against Casey, and the Cook Report just shifted the race from lean Democrat to toss-up. There is little room for error in Pennsylvania, as well as other states like Wisconsin and Arizona, where results at those polls could play a decisive role on who controls the Hill come November. Michelle London, CBN News, Washington.
All right, thank you, Michelle. And to the race for the White House, both campaigns colliding in Texas. Vice President Harris is in Houston tonight talking about reproductive rights and rolling out the star power in a bid to whip up enthusiasm. Tonight, Beyonce will join her. Meanwhile, former President Trump was in Austin today campaigning on illegal immigration. He also did the popular Joe Rogan podcast, which has some 15 million followers on Spotify. Tonight, he's holding a rally in Traverse City, Michigan. And the race still appears to be tied. A new poll out today from the New York Times and Siena College shows both candidates at 48% nationally. The Times writing, quote, a high-profile debate, 2 attempts on Trump's life, dozens of rallies across 7 battlefield states, and hundreds of millions spent on advertisements have seemingly done little to change the trajectory of the race. All right, Nathan Gonzalez joins us now. He is a Faith Nation contributor and the editor and publisher of Inside Elections. Nathan, welcome back to the show. Happy Friday. So we're seeing huge last-minute media pushes from both of the campaigns. How is this trickling down into the tight House and Senate races?
I think whether it's media that the candidates, the presidential candidates, are consuming because of the being out and about and doing interviews, or the media that they're paying for on TV ads, that complicates the races for the Senate and the House, because it makes it harder for Senate and House candidates to get attention, to help people know who they are, to get their message out. And so the House and Senate campaigns feel the squeeze from the presidential race, and sometimes they're paying bigger dollars for campaign ads because there's just so much pressure to get on TV and get in front of voters.
Yeah, what did you make of the Bob Casey ad that basically was siding with Biden, and it was saying that he bucked Biden on the fracking issue?
Well, I think it shows that Pennsylvania is a very close race, and Casey knows that he might need some crossover voters or people that are supporting Trump, and so he wants to win re-election. And if that means disagreeing with the president, then he's going to disagree with the president.
Yeah, Nathan, how likely do you think it is Republicans flip the Senate?
I think it's pretty likely. I mean, out of the 3 big pieces that we're talking about in this election, the presidential race, the Senate, and the House, I'm most confident that Republicans are going to get control of the Senate. The White House and the U.S. House, those are much closer and I think more uncertain than the race for the Senate. Jessica, in that package, I think she laid it out pretty well. Republicans should win the Senate unless they kind of shoot themselves in the foot in a couple of places.
Yeah. So today, a federal judge blocked an executive order by Virginia Governor Glenn Youngkin that sought to remove non-citizen voters from voting rolls. Just your reaction on that, Nathan, and what that could mean for November 5th.
I mean, I think it's gonna allow some, probably mainly Republicans, to criticize and say that this is opening up the process for fraud or for people that shouldn't be voting. But it is already illegal for non-citizens to vote in federal elections. It is a felony to do that, and so I think it'll probably be a talking point, and it'll raise some people get excited about it. But I'm not sure that it's going to be the deciding factor in Virginia or in the race overall.
Mm-hmm. So, of course, we might not know the winner on election night if the race is, in fact, as close as these public polls seem to suggest. Some of the internal polls seem to be trending more toward Trump. But what do you anticipate, Nathan? Could we see a clear winner on election night, or do you think this could be drawn out over several days, maybe even weeks?
Well, we'll get to experience it live together, Jenna, right? I think it will take a while to know have a full context of the results, meaning it's going to take a while to count ballots in some states because of state laws. There are going to be legal challenges in many states about how the ballots should be counted, and I think those processes will take time. That being said, we might have indications of the way the election is going. Take North Carolina, for example. If we know who wins North Carolina, let's say Harris wins North Carolina, I think that puts her in a good position, even though we don't officially know other states. Or let's take Michigan. If Trump wins Michigan, that's probably a good indication for him that he's on the right path, even if we don't know the results of Pennsylvania on election night. So I think the best thing is to practice our patience, and if we know earlier rather than later, then I think that's just a bonus.
Yeah, and get your popcorn ready. All right, Nathan Gonzalez, always good to see you. Have a great weekend.
You as well. We'll see you soon.
All right, well, both parties are preparing for post-election legal battles that could go on for more than a month. The GOP is training 200,000 poll watchers to spot red flags at voting sites. Altogether, 900 lawyers are standing by for legal challenges. CBN's chief political analyst David Brody reports.
In a presidential race expected to end with a razor-thin margin, the Republican National Committee is focused on what it calls an election integrity battle plan. RNC co-chair Lara Trump tells CBN News Republicans aren't playing around.
We want to make sure that we send a message loud and clear out there that if you're a person who is willing to cheat in our elections, we will find you, we'll track you down, and we'll prosecute you to the full extent of the law.
They don't want a repeat of 2020, an election they believe had signs of mischief throughout. This time, their team of 500 lawyers across the battleground states filed 125 lawsuits in 25 states, focused on cleaner voter rolls and more ID requirements, just to name a few. They've also recruited more than 200,000 volunteers to serve as on-site election poll watchers. CBN News spoke to the RNC chairman about this key component. How is it going to work? What's it going to look like on Election Day for folks?
They're going through training, and we're going to be able to deploy them all across the country as poll observers to make sure that we are in the room whenever a vote is being cast or counted.
You said in the room. Can you kind of help us through that?
If something is out of sorts, somebody that's not on the voter rolls comes in, their name's not on the list, and you give them a ballot anyway, well, we'll need to flag that, right? If somebody comes in and tries to vote again, or if there's any other discrepancy that comes up, and then we teach them, how do you raise the flag?
Democrats say Republicans are not being honest about their real intent.
People who vote, like 99.99999%, are voting legally. So when Republicans often talk about election integrity, it's just an excuse to restrict people from voting.
Democrats will also have tens of thousands of poll watchers out in force, along with some 400 lawyers who have been preparing for a legal battle ever since Trump left office. That's because the party's bigger concern is possible legal battles after Election Day.
As we prepare for 2024, Donald Trump is plotting his next crime. We know it will involve election interference. We know it'll involve efforts to prevent the will of the voters from having its day.
The RNC chairman shares the feeling that what happens at the polls will probably be settled in court. How concerned are you that this could be in litigation for 30 to 60 days afterwards?
Very concerned, and we have built up our legal teams all across the country.
Lara Trump doesn't believe it will come to that.
I believe that if we have a free, fair, and transparent election, Donald Trump will be victorious on November 5th. And I feel like we're going to shut it down early, David, because I think it's going to be such a huge vote for him that we're not even going to wait until the wee hours of the morning for people to call it. It will be an early call.
David Brody, CBN News, Washington.
And join CBN News for our special election night coverage featuring expert analysis and minute-by-minute results. You can tune in on the CBN News Channel and our YouTube page. We kick things off at 8 p.m. on November 5th. All right, coming up, as the U.S. race to secure a ceasefire, Israel escalates its war against Hezbollah and Hamas. Welcome back. High-stakes negotiations are set to begin this weekend in the Middle East. American, Israeli, and Arab officials are headed to Qatar. The goal, jumpstart negotiations to reach a ceasefire in Gaza and free more than 100 hostages. This as Israel's war against Hezbollah and Hamas grows deadlier by the day. The IDF struck targets across the Gaza Strip Friday. At least 38 people were killed, according to the Hamas-run health ministry. Israel says it's fighting terrorism embedded in civilian areas. Meanwhile, in Lebanon, heavy strikes against Hezbollah as the terror group fires rockets into northern Israel. At least 2 Israelis were killed in those attacks today, but the IDF says it is winning the war against Hezbollah.
In the north, there is a possibility of reaching a sharp conclusion. We thoroughly dismantled Hezbollah's senior chain of command in a very thorough manner.
Meanwhile, there are reports that Iran is preparing for war with Israel. According to the New York Times, Iran's supreme leader has ordered the military to develop plans in response to an Israeli strike. The IDF has vowed to retaliate against any Iranian missile attack on October 1st. Now to the war in Ukraine. North Korean troops could join Russia on the battlefield as early as this weekend. That's according to Ukrainian officials who say the Hermit Kingdom has sent 10,000 soldiers to help Moscow. Washington is concerned the deployment could escalate the conflict with ripple effects across the region. South Korea is outraged, now threatening to send weapons and resources to Ukraine. The U.S. is consulting its allies about how to respond. Up next, a public apology and a look at the dark history behind America's Indigenous boarding schools. Right after this. Welcome back. For more than 150 years, the federal government forced Native American children into boarding schools. There, they faced isolation, abuse, and were deprived of their culture. Many never saw their families again. Today, President Biden formally apologized for the American policy that tore communities apart and traumatized generations.
Quite frankly, there's no excuse that this apology took 50 years to make. The federal Indian boarding school policy, the pain it has caused, will always be a significant mark of shame, a blot on American history.
A federal report released this year found that more than 900 children died at those boarding schools. CBN's Mark Martin traveled to Montana to explore the devastating story and hear from survivors.
When he was a child, Blackfeet Nation member Wes Bremner attended the Cut Bank boarding school in northwestern Montana. As a second grader in the 60s, distance and harsh winters made it a necessity. The school environment proved harsh as well. Bremner says physical abuse started on day one when a staff member punched him.
He thumped me right between the eyes and almost knocked me out, and I went against the wall. It was kind of wobbly on my feet, and he said, "Now you go to bed." And it was about this time of day.
Bremner is just one of many students who say they endured harsh corporal punishment and demeaning verbal abuse at Indigenous boarding schools. And some came forward years later with allegations of sexual abuse. We asked Bremner if that ever happened to him.
If I was, I would take it to my grave.
Okay. And why is that again?
It's the past. It's not something you would, it's nobody's business.
The boarding school where Bremner attended is still operational today. He says it's better run, and the abuse that took place when he was a student is unheard of. On the Flathead Reservation in Montana, Indigenous boarding schools existed alongside St. Ignatius Mission. The Jesuit priest and pastor, Father Craig Hightower, says abuse happened at these schools as well.
There was some sexual abuse, there's no question about it, and that's already been litigated in court. The majority of the abuses were trying to take away their culture, trying to assimilate them into the white world, and the corporal punishment of the day. Just the corporal punishment that was common at that time.
All that is left of the original Ursuline Academy are the remains of this grotto that held a statue of Mary. Children ages preschool to high school gathered in a building that once stood on this property.
Was it worse with the priests and the nuns? Maybe, maybe not, but those were the big controversies of kids, really being beaten and things like that. Unfortunately, that was part of the culture overall.
According to the National Native American Boarding School Healing Coalition, more than 350 U.S. government-funded and many times church-run boarding schools operated in the 19th and 20th centuries. The movement started under the Indian Civilization Act of 1819 with the goal of assimilating Indigenous children. Bremner says his mother was one of thousands of kids taken from their communities. He says at her school there was a sign that read, "Kill the culture, save the child." Montana State Representative Sharon Stewart Paraguay says while Crow Tribe children weren't forcibly taken, the goal remained the same.
Children weren't allowed to speak the language. Part of it was the hair was cut, especially with the boys and the girls. Their hair was cut, and then they were forced to move into the modern dress.
The 2021 discovery of more than 200 unmarked graves at an Indian boarding school in Canada led Deb Haaland, the U.S. Secretary of the Interior, to launch a national investigation, the Federal Indian Boarding School Initiative. Haaland, the first Native American cabinet secretary, says her 8-year-old grandparents were taken from their families.
A lot of them died. Some of them probably died from broken hearts, and a lot of them just died from being in close contact with disease that they couldn't get rid of because everybody was crammed in together.
And so what we want for our children is to help them to reconnect to who they are and to be strong and to have thriving nations. That's what we hope Deb Haaland will be able to do, is to change the policy, educational policy, to provide empowerment.
It's no strange thing for Native American communities not to trust the government. But to be able to create and to heal bonds within Native American communities in county governments, state governments, and the federal government, and to have that conversation so that we can move forward.
Mark Martin, CBN News, Montana.
What item takes top billing in the toy world? A look at the finalists for this year's Hall of Fame inductees right after this. Finally tonight, while much of America eagerly anticipates finding out the winner of the election, for U.S. toy makers, another competition is taking top billing heading into next month. The unveiling of the newest additions to the Toy Hall of Fame.
Every November, we pick 3 or 4 based on thousands of nominations. This year's nominees include everything from card games like Phase 10 and Pokemon cards, to classics like My Little Pony, to the trampoline.
Also in the running this year are the classic Choose Your Own Adventure books. I have to say, Phase 10 is a very fun game. We've spent a lot of time with that one. That's going to do it for Faith Nation tonight. Thank you so much for joining us this Friday. We hope you have a great weekend, and we'll see you back here Monday.